Thank you so much for inviting me to participate today. What you're doing is fantastic, and I'm really impressed with how you've run with this since we first met in Montreal.
Thank you.
It's very special, as are you, as
Oh,
are you.
feel the same. Thank you.
Tomorrow is International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And so it seems very fitting to be talking about it, talking about the Holocaust from the perspective of one young girl who lived through it and who was amazingly, and a bit later in her life as an adult, was able to share her story in these amazingly beautiful and very powerful fabric collage and embroidered panels, tapestries. So I'll start by just telling you a bit about my mother and her story. My mother was a 12-year-old girl living in a small village in the center of Poland in 1939 when the Germans invaded Poland and World War II began. And all my life, I always heard stories about my mother's childhood before the war and then during the occupation. When the Germans came into Poland, they came straight to her village and occupied it for 3 years. So my mother was living under German occupation until 1942, when they ordered all the Jews of her village, her family, extended family, and the surrounding area to report to the train station in the town of Krasnik. My mother was then 15. No one knew what exactly was going to happen to them, but having lived under German occupation for 3 years, my mother knew it wasn't going to be good. And she didn't want to go. She didn't want to go with the rest of her family. And so she took her 13-year-old sister, and the two of them left their parents and went off to try and survive on their own. So, as I said, these are stories that I heard all my life, but really I can't remember when I didn't know my mother's story. But when she was about 50, she decided that she wanted me and my sister to see what her home and her family looked like. She had never been trained in art. She didn't know how to draw, but she could sew anything. She had been apprenticed to a dressmaker when she was 8 years old. And so she did what came naturally to her. She took a large piece of fabric and she filled it in with lots and lots of stitches. So if you'll turn to the first slide, please. And this is the very first picture she did. And this is quite large. It's about 4 feet by 4 feet. And my mother is at the lower left of the picture. She's walking up the hill carrying 2 pails of water to her house. Her sister, Manya, who was her next youngest sister, is waiting for her. And in front of the house is her father, her mother, her two younger sisters, and her brother, and the horse and the dog. So this was my mother's, one of my mother's happiest memories of her home before the war. And she would say that at the time of this picture, they were all happy, the whole family, and together. So the next picture, well, when she was finished with this picture, she gave it to me. I was her older daughter and I lived nearby. So she gave me this picture, but then she started on the next picture, which is the next slide, to give to my sister. And here she has filled every square inch of this piece with stitches. And here she's remembering swimming in the river across the road from their house. And she's in the river with her brother, and her sister is are on the grass on the banks of the river with the cows and the chickens and the geese and the ducks. The farmers are coming in off the fields. And again, it's a very beautiful pastoral scene, but it's also remarkably accomplished stitching. Every stitch, this is crewel yarn, every stitch of the river flows. And so she was able to create not just the image, but also the flow of the water. So she finished this one and gave it to my sister. And then uh, she didn't return to these pictures for another 10 years or so. My children were born, her grandchildren came along during this time. And my mother had a business she owned. She and my father owned a women's clothing store in Brooklyn. So she was busy running the business. But about 10 years later, as I said, after having made tons of things from toys and clothes for my children, she decided to go back to these memory pictures. And although I'm going to show them to you in chronological order, the order of events, she didn't create them in this order. I say there was the chronological order, and then there was the psychological order. And so when we get to that point, I'll tell you when she actually, or what the first images were that she returned to. But for now, I'm going to just take you through uh, a couple of images, other images of her life before the war. So this is the next couple that I'll show you are of Jewish holidays. Those were her happiest memories. And here she and her brother and sisters are making their way to their grandparents' house for Shavuos. And her brother had made her a pair of stilts. My mother used to say that he was the toy maker, but she was the toy tester. So she got to try out these stilts walking to their grandparents' house, and she was so proud of the fact that she made it all the way to their grandparents' house without falling. And they were walking, as you can see, through these fields of wheat with some cornflowers growing amidst it. And she loved this wheat motif. And this is the only picture in which she actually embroidered in the margins, or the borders rather, of the pictures. I guess she just couldn't get enough of it. And I'll show you in the next slide a detail. So you can see how exquisite each sheaf of wheat is, and the cornflowers as well. Her stitching was really immaculate. And of course, the color and the vibrancy of the whole picture is amazing. I, I loved all of the images that my mother did. She made 36 of these pictures altogether. But this one has a special place in my heart because it's so alive and beautiful. Well, we'll go on to the next one. Next slide. This is my mother's memory of the women of Nishik, her village of Nishik, making matzahs for Passover at the house of Shmuel, he was the village shoemaker, but he had a big oven, and he and his son would bake all the matzahs as the women on a kind of assembly line would make them. And in the back of the picture, my mother's mother, who she said made the best matzahs in Nishik because none of them, because she made them quickly and without error, so she didn't have to discard them as treif. So she was the model matzah maker, of which my mother was really proud. And you can see that in this picture, it was sort of in the midway point, maybe, of her creations. She started using some fabric paint over the oven and to create the appearance of soot above the oven, and then, of course, the heat of the oven. And if I don't think I included a detail, but if you can see these later, and I'll show you where you can find them in great detail. But the shoes hanging on the side, because Shmuel was the shoemaker, she even painted dabs of mud, of what was supposed to be mud, on the shoes. It was very realistic. But as she tells this story in the caption, and almost all of her pictures have captions in which she shares the story. In this one, in the last sentence, she says, "These were the last matzahs we ever had in Nishik." So there's a kind of, even in the good feeling and celebration in the picture, there's this ending of poignancy. So next slide, please. This is the day that the Nazis arrived in Germany, in Nishik, sorry. And her grandparents' house was at the entrance to the village. So when my mother heard that there was a troop of German soldiers coming into the village, she and a couple of her friends ran to her grandparents' house to watch the soldiers arrive. And as they stood there, one of the soldiers dismounted and pulled her grandfather off the steps of his house, and with his bayonet cut off her grandfather's beard, because at that time only Jewish men wore beards. So if you had a beard, it identified you as a Jew. So in this picture, as in all the other pictures of the war years, my mother bordered the picture in black. You may recall in the previous pictures, she used colors of blue, shades of blue in those images, because she wanted to distinguish the pre-war years and later the post-war years from those of the war years. So she used color as part of her imagery. In this picture, this is one of the earlier pictures she did. And one of the things that is very remarkable, noteworthy, is that no matter how horrific the scene that she's describing, she never omitted the beauty of the scene. So she still included in this picture the flowers that were growing and the chickens in the yard in front of the house, because she was including all of her memories, both the beauty and the horror. Next slide, please. This is now June 1940. And one day, and again, as I said, this is still during the occupation years. And one day, my mother developed this terrible toothache. She had heard that there was a dentist in the German camp. So she wanted to go see him, but she knew she couldn't go there under her own identity. He would never have helped her, knowing that she was Jewish. So she got a friend of hers, a Polish girl, to go with her, and she taught her friend how to say in German, "My sister has a toothache," because if my mother had tried to speak German, her Yiddish accent would have given her away. So they went together, and in this picture, the dentist, she told or her friend told the dentist about her, and the dentist pulled her tooth and afterwards gave her a piece of chocolate as a reward for her good behavior. And then she went home and told her mother what she had done because she knew if she had told her mother beforehand what she was planning to do, her mother would never have let her go. It was just too dangerous. On the other hand, my mother was in terrible pain and she was desperate to relieve her pain. So she was willing to take the risk of creating this ruse, this fake identity in order to relieve her pain. And that act of creating a new identity was actually what she went on to do to save her life later on. Next slide, please. This is now June 1941. And again, as I said earlier, I thought all of these pictures are just so amazing. And when my mother created them, um, she would show them to me. My kids and I, my husband, my family, and I would have dinner with my parents every Sunday. And so I could see my mother and her works in progress. She was still busy running the store, but on Sundays she could work on her pictures. So she would show me what she had done and we would talk about what she was going to do next and so on. But when I saw this, I was literally awestruck. This is a scene in which, as I said, it was June 1941. And by this point, the Jews in her village and the area were no longer allowed to own farm animals. And in my mother's family, that was a huge interruption because her father was a horse trader. He used to travel around buying and selling horses. Her mother used to raise poultry to sell at market. So my mother and her sister had to go to work for Polish farmers, and they did what they knew how to do, which was to look after their animals. So here, on this beautiful day in June, my mother and her sister took the cows that they were tending. My mother decided to take them to the good pasture near the Vistula River, which is the big river that runs through the center of Poland. And when they got there, my mother realized she could see through the trees that they were next to this labor camp called Yanuschew, which had been a prison camp before the war. The Germans turned it into a slave labor camp for young Jewish men and boys. And my mother could see what was happening there. And these young men and boys being beaten and worked hard. And in the foreground, when they got too exhausted to work anymore, they were led into the forest and shot. And my mother said that while they stood there, she could just hear one shot after another. What left me awestruck when I saw this picture was that in this one image, she could capture the totality of the war. On the one side, life still went on, and flowers were blooming, trees were bearing fruit. This is June. The grass was so lush. And if you can see that, when you can see this up close, you'll see that every stitch, every blade of grass is a separate stitch. So this is the incredibly beautiful, exquisitely beautiful scene on one side, in contrast to the other side of the picture, which is almost devoid of color and which has this energy, this dynamism of terror and fear and brutality. So in this one image, she captured these two dimensions, both these dimensions of what war was like for the people who had to endure it. When I was doing a presentation, this is some years ago now, I did a presentation for a fourth grade class, and I showed them this picture and asked them what they thought about it. And one of the boys raised his hand and he said, "This picture shows me that there's a thin line between good and evil." So amazing that my mother captured that and that, of course, this boy understood it. Next slide, please. Well, things got worse and worse. That was 1941. This is now 1942. In October, the Germans ordered all of the Jews of the village and the surrounding area to leave their homes on October 15th, 1942, to leave their homes and um, and report to the train station in the nearby city of Krasnik. And my mother, the night before, my mother cried and cried. She just refused to go. As I said, she didn't know what was going to happen, but having lived under German occupation for 3 years, she knew it wasn't going to be good. And they ordered the Jews to leave their homes by 10 o'clock in the morning. And if any were found in their homes by after that point, they would be shot. So my mother, the night before, begged her father to think of somebody that she could go to, somebody, a Pole, who would take them in. Her father, as I said, used to travel around buying and selling horses, so he had a lot of Polish friends. And she begged him to think of one in another village that she could go to. So he came up with this name of a man named Stefan, who was a friend of his. So she decided that was it. She was going to Stefan's house. And she wanted Manya to come with her because she didn't feel she could do this all on her own. Even though she was willing to leave the rest of the family, she needed to have one person with her, her sister. And they also wanted to, her idea was that they would go to work and she wanted Manya to be her helpmeet. So here they are on the morning of October 15th, and everybody is crying. And this was the last time my mother and Manya saw their family. After this, that was the last moment. So this was, I said earlier, I wanted to show you some of the pictures she did um, earlier in her psychological order. There were two other dream pictures, which I don't think I included in the slides, but this was one of the first pictures of this sequence that she did. And I believe the next picture, if you would go to the next slide, this is one of the last pictures that she did. And again, this is a scene of her leave taking. But by this point, and this is now 10 years later, she did most of these pictures over a 10-year period. Well, first of all, in this picture, she has already put herself and Manya in the distance. They are leaving, they've said goodbye to their family, and she's presenting this scene from the perspective of her parents. And here they are, her mother and father are walking down the hill to the wagons, which contain all the Jews of Nishik heading to the train station. And her brother is standing by one of the wagons, and the two younger girls are in the wagons. And I was really so touched by the fact that my mother this is a perspective that she never saw herself. She's imagining what it looked like from her parents' perspective because she knew her parents, her mother in particular, was saying goodbye for the last time to her children. And what she remembered of this leave taking from her family when her mother, when when they embraced, her mother said to her in Yiddish, of course, but she said, "Goodbye, my children, maybe you will live." And here the two girls are going off with a neighbor who their mother had paid to take them to the house of Stefan, her father's friend, in the neighboring village of Dombrova. So they're already, as I said, out of the picture. But what happened was that the neighbor took the girls to her sister's house and told them to wait there for her. And after a while, my mother began to get very worried because there is a bounty on Jewish on turning in Jews. So if you were a Pole and you turned in a Jew to the Nazis, you could get sugar or kerosene or something. And so my mother feared that this neighbor was going to turn them in. So the girls left and they came to the road in the next picture. They came to the road and they joined the people who were walking. Most of them, many of them were in wagons, but many of them were walking. And there they came upon their cousin, Dina, who was walking with her baby. And when Manya saw Dina, she just wanted to stay with Dina. She was so eager to find their family again. And so she just wanted to stay with her. But they reached this point on the road where my mother realized that they were soon going to be, there was a turn in the road, and then they would be going into Krasnik, to the train station. And when my mother saw this, she just couldn't continue. And she started pulling Manya off the road with the intent of going to Stefan's house on their own. And Manya didn't want to go. She wanted to stay with Dina and she wanted to continue to, in hopes that they would find their parents and their rest of their family. But this time, earlier, I should say, when my mother wanted to take Manya with her when they were saying goodbye, Manya wanted to stay with the family. She did not want to go with Esther. And then it was their mother who said, Manya, go with Esther. This time it was their cousin Dina who said, who told Manya, go with Esther. And Manya listened. And I've always said that Manya survived because she listened, and Esther survived because she did not. Very different personalities. So in the next slide, please. Oh, yeah, wanted to show you this detail. Um, my mother clearly knew when she was starting this narrative that she was telling a story and she wanted there to be continuity. So she set aside pieces of fabric for the dresses that the two girls were wearing. And if you notice in the pictures I just showed you, and in the subsequent ones, they're wearing dresses made of this cloth. She was always paying attention to the fabric, her fabric choices, because it was her storytelling. Next slide, please. So they made their way to Stefan's house on their own. And when they got there, they just themselves into his arms and told him, "We are Hersch's daughters. Please help us." And he tried to calm them down and told them that he would help them and it would be all right. And he put them up in his attic where they were stringing tobacco leaves. And he kept them there for a couple of days. And then on the third day, when they came down for breakfast, my mother saw that he had their baskets packed already, that he was sending them out. And he explained to them that he couldn't keep them any longer, that everybody in Mnishik knew they had come to him. And if the Germans came, they would kill them, they would kill him, they would kill his whole family, they would burn down his farm. They couldn't stay. So they left in the pouring rain on this muddy road. They walked till they came to the forest, and there they waited till the sun came out. They hung up their boots to dry. And this is when my mother realized that they could not survive as Hersch's daughters. And so she made up these identities for them as these two Polish Catholic farm girls who came from a town, a village on the other side of the Vistula River that she had heard mentioned, a town called, or a place called Chizov. And she made up names for them. She was Josefina Grochowiecka, and Manya was Maria Grochowiecka. And they had been separated from their family because their family lost their farm to these ethnic Germans, these so-called Volksdeutsch. The German soldiers were confiscating Polish farms to give to these ethnic Germans. And so my mother's story was that they had lost their farm, they were separated from their family, and they were looking for work. And this was the story that they planned to tell as they made their way to the next village in hopes of finding refuge. This picture, I wanted to just pause here for a minute. I was so impressed by how my mother figured out how to tell the story, which took place over several days in just this one image. My mother, I mentioned at the outset, my mother had never been trained as an artist. She didn't know how to draw, but she had this innate sense of composition, color. She was an artist. She was an untrained artist, and she figured out, and she, of course, was incredibly talented and skillful in stitching. So she figured out a way to tell this story despite her lack of artistic training. And I think it's just an incredibly powerful, successful image. Next slide, please. Well, they went from one village to another village with their story, but each place they came to, people wouldn't take them until they asked for papers. They wanted proof of their identity. And of course, they had no papers. So they had to leave each time until they came to the village of Grabovka. This was kind of their last stop. And they were hiding in the forest. They were making their way through the forest, and it was growing dark. And my mother realized that if they were found in the forest after dark, they would be assumed to be Jewish because two girls would not otherwise be in the forest. So they had to get to the next village of Grabovka before dark. And my mother told Manya, we're going to go to the village. We're going to go straight to the sheriff's house. We're going to tell him our story, and we're going to insist that he help us. And Manya, of course, was appalled. She was not the risk taker, but she went along with my mother. So they got to the village, they went straight to the sheriff's house, and the sheriff asked them, he was a young guy. He said, "We wouldn't by any chance be Jewish, would we?" And my mother acted insulted. How could you say such a thing? And so he laughed and dismissed the uh, their insulted manner. And he said, "Well, I can keep Manya, well, Marisha, he called her. She can work with my mother." And then he went and fetched this older farmer as an employer for my mother. He was an older farmer. His wife was infirm and he needed a lot of help on his farm. And so he was willing to take my mother in. And they never asked for papers. Nobody in Grabovka asked for papers. So my mother went to work for this farmer who she grew very attached to. And she, in fact, called him Dziadek, which is the Polish word for grandfather. And she did everything for him. She kept house for him, she cleaned, she cooked. And he was very grateful for her talents because she was a very good cook. Although the first bread she made was very unsuccessful. So he had to find somebody to show her how to make. Oh, she knew how to make the bread, but she didn't have the starter dough, which is what she used to have. So somehow she got some starter dough and then she made excellent bread. And so in this scene, this is again, once again in June, another beautiful day. Her farmer, Jadek, kept bees, and she asked him if she could dig up this plot of land and plant vegetables and strawberries and so on. And he gave her carte blanche. And so one day she was tending her garden plot in front of the strawberries when these two German soldiers came in, just trampling on her garden. And Jadek, you see him in the lower left corner, came out of his house to watch, to keep an eye on things. And the soldiers were asking her in German. They were trying to engage her and talking to her. And my mother, of course, kept her head down. She had to pretend that she didn't understand them. She was terrified. But just at that point, the bees came out of their hives and started swarming around the soldiers, and they eventually drove them off. And before they left, one of the soldiers said to my mother, asked her, "Why aren't they stinging you?" But my mother speculated that they were unaccustomed to strangers, and so were attacking the soldiers. But my mother always thought of this as the day that the bees saved her. Can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah. I wanted you to see these bees. I was just mesmerized by these bees. And, there are so many bees in this picture. All the hives are filled with these individual tiny bees, and then these bees swarming around them. They're just perfect, perfect. Look at the wings on them and their bodies. Her her attention to detail and her talent for detail was just amazing, just amazing. Next slide, please. This is now in July of 1944. The Germans were being driven westward by the Russians. And so the tide of war was turning. And one day, this is July 1944, at at dawn, this platoon of Russian soldiers came marching through the village, and all the people of the village came rushing out to see them. And they offered them water, something, food, but they were not allowed to stop uh, and and take anything. They just kept going. And my mother in this picture, you can see the girl with braids on this path. She embroidered her name. She wanted to identify herself in this picture, so she embroidered Esther on the path before her. And in the picture, she says, "Freedom came after describing the scene. In the last sentence, she says, "Freedom came for Manya and me, but nobody else survived." Next slide, please. So after a period of time, my mother waited, but she was so eager to go back to Mnishik and see if anybody else had survived. So when she got there, no other Jews had survived. No, there was no one in her family had returned to Mnishik, and no one in the village knew what had happened to the Jews. One of her neighbors thought that maybe they had been taken to Majdanek, which was a concentration camp in Lublin, not that far. It was the closest one to where they lived, to Nishik. And so people thought maybe that's where the Jews had been taken. So my mother decided to go there and see if she could find any signs of her family. And you can see her in this yellow dress at the bottom of the picture entering Majdanek. And I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but it is a huge camp. And the Germans left very quickly, so nothing in this camp was destroyed. All the gas chambers and um, uh, everything, barracks, um, the crematorium had been left in place. And the Russian army had liberated the camp. And so soldiers gave my mother a tour of the camp. And after they showed her all these features of the camp, and at the top of the picture, you can see this field of these giant cabbages, which were growing on ashes, which she also included in the picture from the crematorium. And after my mother saw all of this, she decided to join the Polish army, which was along with the Russian army under the Soviet command. And my mother went with the army to Germany. She was 17 years old. Next slide, please. Here she remembered the Russian soldiers on their way to Berlin. And there she included on the right side of the picture on the road a woman soldier who's holding a red flag, which in which my mother stitched the word Berlin. And along the way, there were all these German soldiers. Well, it had clearly been the site of a recent battle. And there were these German soldiers who were hanging from trees along the road. I don't think that they had been hanged to for their death. I think that they had been killed, and the Germans just strung them up as a kind of victory um, symbol. You can see bodies in the foreground lying on the grass. So my mother went with the army to Berlin, and let's see, can you go to the next picture? Yeah. So after she got to Germany, she went back to Poland to get Manya, and the two of them went back to Germany to a DP camp, a displaced persons camp in the American zone in Germany. And that's where my mother met my father, who is also Polish, and my aunt met her husband, and they all got married. There were many weddings in this camp because many of the people who made it to the camp were of about their age, and they just wanted to reclaim their lives. And so but there was only one wedding dress. And so there are pictures of these weddings that my parents had that I were in our family album. And all the brides are wearing the same dress, which they only wore when the photographer came to their camp. That was their their celebration. So my father had relatives in the United States, and he left the camp when my mother got pregnant. He left the camp to go to Belgium to look for work there because he didn't want me to be born in the camp. And so my mother joined him there. And after I was born and their visa to the United States came through, we sailed to New York, where my father had some cousins. So here we are arriving in New York at the base of the Statue of Liberty. This is you can make me out this little pink thing on my father's shoulder, my mother, and my father's cousin, Clara. And as she looked at me, my mother recalled her saying, "My dear child, this will be your America." And of course, that was when America was still a welcoming country, in contrast to what we see today. This really breaks my heart. Well, next slide. So um, we went to live in Brooklyn, and this was the backyard of the house that we lived in. And in this backyard, there was an old, overgrown sour cherry tree. And my mother, among her many talents, many, many talents, she was a fantastic cook. So she saw all these sour cherries, and she would climb this tree to send down these buckets of cherries to me and my sister. And then she included in the back, you can see this boy hanging over the fence, who is, because my sister and I were the envy of all the kids in the neighborhood because our mother could climb trees. So in the caption, my mother tells the story of how when she was a little girl, she used to sit with her grandmother, and her grandmother would say, "Esther, when you grow up, you're going to go to America because in America, money grows on trees." And my mother would say, "But Bubba, grandmother, I, I'm, I'm so good at climbing trees." And she said she would always think of that conversation every time she climbed this tree. So next slide, please. Just wanted you to see a portrait of my mother as she looked when she was doing all these pictures. The next slide, please. And this is, you can see the background behind me. That's, of course, just photographic, but this is the gallery in which the art is now displayed in Baltimore at the American Visionary Art Museum. And it's a beautiful exhibit, I think, of the many times it's and places that it's been exhibited. I think this might be my favorite because it includes Esther's house and her dog and her cow. And of course, the all the pictures are arrayed on this beautiful red, vivid, colorful background, just as her pictures themselves were. So I would really encourage you, if any of you are anywhere near Baltimore, I would really encourage you to go visit the exhibit, see it in person. As beautiful as the pictures are in these images, seeing them in person is amazing. Really, a very powerful experience. It's the American Visionary Art Museum. Um, and maybe we'll put this in the chat. The next slide um, in Baltimore. So I just wanted to show this to you because the exhibit includes all of my mother's pieces, but it also includes a few pieces by other artists who bear witness, have borne witness in their art to other acts of genocide. And this is a painting that was done by a woman an artist who lives in Philadelphia, who actually went to Rwanda to work with people there who had lost much of their family and their home during the genocide there. And she went there to help them create a memorial. And what's interesting is that when she went there, she took a copy of our book, which I will tell you a little bit about in just a minute. She wanted to inspire them to think about how to memorialize their family and loved ones. But this was a painting that she did. Lily Yeh, her name is, of what people there had experienced. Next slide, please. This is on our website, and I'll show you the URL, the web address, in a minute. But on the website, there is a video tour of the entire exhibit, picture by picture, and it's narrated by me with just 1 minute narration. And they're beautifully scanned and, with that Ken Burns movement effect. So they're beautiful little videos, and you can see every one of the images. I've just shown you some highlights, but you can see all 36 of them on this video tour. Next slide, please. This is the cover of the book that we publish, Memories of Survival. You can get it on Amazon. You can link to the Amazon page through our website, or you can just go directly to Amazon and search for it on the title. But I do want to encourage you to go to our website, which I believe you can get the address of on the next slide. Yeah, it's just artandremembrance.org. There's so much material to be seen on the website. There are images of uh, all of the artwork, each picture, the video tour. There are, for those of you who are educators or have family or friends who are educators, we have lesson plans for students who are from middle and high school years. But the lesson plans are just so rich and informative. So I would encourage you to take a look. But again, as I said, there is a lot of material on the website. So just just explore it, and I'm sure you'll find so much to hold your interest. So that is my presentation.